Welcome to Around Space. I'm Kent Miller. Today we're going to be talking about Mars One, a plan for the one-way settlement of Mars. I'm delighted to have with us 3 Mars settlement candidates and an activist. First, on my left, is Dr. Zucker, and Dr. Leila Zucker, medical doctor. In 2007, she got her MD at the Georgetown School of Medicine here in Washington, D.C. In 2011, she began work as an emergency medicine physician at Howard University. Next, we have Dr. Robert Terry, computational physicist and a member of the Civil Air Patrol, and he's also a Mars Society member. In 1979, he got his PhD in physics at Johns Hopkins University, and the next year began work at the Naval Research Laboratory. In 1999, he was a founding member and now lifetime member of the Mars Society. Then first on my right, we have Sonia Van Meter, a political consultant. In 2003, she got her bachelor's in sociology from Georgia State University, and from 2009 until today, she is a managing director from an opposition research firm here in Washington, D.C. Last but not least, we have Oscar Mathews, a civilian naval contractor and naval reservist. Starting in 2015, he began his work on a PhD in aerospace at Old Dominion University. His main interests are spacecraft shielding and in situ resource utilization. Welcome to this table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to know, Sonia, what is Mars One?
And that is a fantastic question. The Mars One project is a Dutch nonprofit that has set out to establish the first human colony on Mars. They want to have human beings living on Mars by 2026. They've given themselves a very aggressive timeline, a very ambitious timeline, but they believe that they can make this happen with existing technology and simply by raising a whole lot of money to do it.
Okay. Why go to Mars?
Why not go to Mars? I think you'll find if you ask just about any of the other candidates, Mars is the next giant leap for mankind. It's the next closest thing, aside from, of course, the moon. But it's a, relatively speaking, it's a hospitable environment for human beings. It has a very, very modest atmosphere, but it does have gravity. It's got a solid surface for us to walk around on. It's got resources there that we can use. And knowing more about that planet is going to teach us infinitely more about what we know about humanity's evolution and our own planet's evolution here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the technology that we would need to develop to get to Mars, we could also use on Earth for closed-loop sustainability and things like that. Much like we have a lot of spin-offs from NASA that we use now. For example, we have high-temperature ceramics and GPS and things like that. So the investment that you get from going to Mars can pay you back multiple times in dividends.
All right. Let me ask you, our medical doctor, the most important question about candidate selection. We learned in the early days of rocket launches for Mercury, every Yahoo in America applied, and you have to have a way of filtering these people out and to get to people who can actually do the mission.
Well, a mission of settlement is very different from our missions that we've had to date, which are missions of exploration. So what you're looking for is very different. You still need people who are intelligent, can learn, are capable of doing engineering and research, can be trained to do that if they don't know those skills already. But more importantly, you're going to need a cohesive team of 4 that is going to be sent in 2026, and they're going to have to rely on each other. They're going to have to be able to live together in isolation. So this is all being looked at. We have Dr. Norbert Kraft, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Mars One, and he is basically an expert in this topic. For over 20 years, he's been looking at long-term isolation with an eye towards space colonization and space travel. And he is the one who's actually doing the selection for Mars One, which I think is a really brilliant concept. A lot of people say, oh, we need the technology first, we need the rocket first. But I would contend that Mars One's idea of getting the right crew is actually the right approach to take.
How many people expressed interest in this one-way mission?
So 200,000 people initially expressed interest by signing up to get more information from Mars One about the application process. That later on, that number has decreased over time. Maybe 80,000 people started an application, maybe 10,000 completed an application. And Norbert Kraft then went through the final sets of applications and selected 1,058 people who then had to present documentation that they could complete a NASA physical. And then he selected a subset of that 1,058 to interview, and finally has narrowed it down to the Mars 100, of which you have 3 candidates here.
Okay, so that's we're looking at medical criteria, psychological criteria,
physical criteria, intellectual criteria.
These are all very high-level criteria, but so you write an essay, you take a quick psychological battery, you have an interview, but it's all very high-level because it's a 10-year select-out process. So even though there's 100 of us now, then eventually they'll diminish that number down to the 6 teams of 4, and then 1 team of 4 will eventually go first.
I'm wondering, was there also an age criteria?
Yes, but only on the low end. You had to be 18 to apply. There was no upper limit.
As long as you were in good medical condition.
Yeah.
I see. If the first mission is going to be in 2026,
right.
You won't all still be alive at that point.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you have no family history issues, if you don't have kidney stones or just any specific problems you're looking for, then you're medically fit.
All right. Let me ask you about the mission plan. Actually, Dr. Terry, the mission plan. Tell me a little bit about the history of that. Describe it.
I think the mission plan for Mars One is a natural crystallization from things that have gone before. Up until the time Mars One was launched and thought about, one of the strongest mission plans outside of NASA was Mars Direct due to Bob Zubrin, which had the fundamental concepts of pre-positioning things on the planet. That's in common with Mars One. All the fundamental concepts of extremely strong and careful use of in situ resources, again in common with Mars One. A plan of sequential settlement and maybe prefabrication of facilities on the planet, again in common with Mars One. But in the Zubrin scenario, there was always going to be a Mars ascent vehicle, or several of them in fact, to bring you home. So that is where the commonality diverges with Mars One. Mars One saves the irritation and challenge of building that on surface launch capability by saying we're just going to go there and stay there until we die. And so we don't have to worry about the launch capability. I suppose if it comes along later and someone said, I didn't really want to do this, we can't, maybe they can go home. But from the outset, for the first few sets of folk, they're there for the duration. And so that's the thing which is different about it. But it's just a natural outgrowth to decide, look, if you're trying to shorten the timeline, you're trying to find resources, trying to find the technical capabilities, what's the minimum set you can get away with? The perfect is the enemy of the good enough. What's good enough to show that humans can be on Mars and be on Mars in a vital, interesting way? We go to Mars for the sake of knowledge of Mars, for the knowledge of Earth, for our humanity itself.
Tell us a little bit more about the technical aspects.
I like Bob's characterization of that. It's very eloquent. The technical aspects of living on Mars or getting to Mars, or what specifically?
Well, the Mars plan. I
I
understand
see.
there's going to be a landing and then
Right.
subsequent landings, and maybe there's some resupply missions as well.
That's correct. So the Mars 1 mission plan, specifically the one-way mission plan, is to have a communications satellite launch, to have a lander and a rover launch, to have another comm satellite launch in an L4 position, and then basically to have 6 unmanned missions to prove the basic technology is safe enough at a certain risk acceptance level for the first crewed mission to arrive in 2027. So it'll launch in 2026, it'll arrive in 2027. And that's after a 6 to 8 month transit time where we'll be in deep space and experiencing all of the wonderful challenges associated with being in a deep space environment. But these are all challenges that are technically feasible to be overcome. They're not easy to be overcome, and we need money and resources. But we also need political will and the perception that these are things that are worthwhile.
Perhaps one of the perennial questions is, why not moon? Why not go to the moon?
Well, that's an ongoing discussion.
Just
Briefly,
short answer.
Briefly speaking, the delta V, the amount of energy you need to get to the moon and the amount of energy you need to get to Mars are comparable.
Okay.
You can learn a lot more from going to Mars, and because Mars does have an atmosphere, you have a lot of readily available chemical elements that you can use in basic chemical processes. The moon is very close, but it doesn't really provide anything in terms of resources. It's very difficult to get what you need to make things. And we've already been to the moon. I know it's kind of a very flimsy argument, but it's very interesting to go to Mars and to do.
But the main argument is there's no atmosphere.
Exactly.
It tends to be resource poor.
Right.
Its only advantage really is that it's close.
Well, and people say, we can rescue people from the moon, but when things go wrong, they generally go wrong very quickly.
Yeah.
Catastrophically?
Exactly. Usually.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing is the moon is actually costs you more energy to get to the moon than it costs you to go to Mars.
Dr. Zurban's
Landing in a
numbers,
vacuum
right?
is
Yeah, because
very-
on Mars you
yeah.
can aerobrake, so you can, for a fixed amount of investment in low Earth orbit, you can send twice as much payload to Mars as you can to the moon if your aerobraking system is, say, like 15% of your craft mass. That's fine.
Not to mention, medically speaking, having gravity, having a day-night cycle that's similar to Earth,
Right.
all of these things make Mars a far better candidate from a medical standpoint.
Right, Mars has
Right.
approximately double the gravity of the moon, so that's very
Right.
important.
And if you want to want to understand the chemistry of Mars, you're really understanding the chemistry of global warming on Earth. It's the same chemistry. There's a very tight binding between green technology we want here and exploration technology we want there. And perhaps when you go to map these missions out and you go to think about how and why you'd want to do it, very strong concept to really consider the synergy between green technology and exploration technology on Mars. It goes across the chemistry of CO2, the nuclear reactors, of solar power, remote medicine, any number of systems for aggressive or different agriculture. So you have that synergy should be exploited. And it's important to avoid the cynicism that says, or the downer that says, I don't want to fix everything here before I go to Mars. Because in fact, you'll fix things here better if you decide you're going to Mars.
Yeah.
Highly probable.
Well, Dr. Zucker, let me just briefly ask. We're going to talk about sustainability in a minute, but that's going to involve perhaps agriculture. Now, one of the critiques of going to Mars is that the soil is toxic. It contains perchlorates, it contains peroxides. It's going to be a challenge to grow stuff in
Kind
it.
of like Clorox.
Yeah. How do we do that? How do we go at starting agriculture?
Well, to start off with, we're going to take a lot of the things that we need. Initially,
Right.
100% of what we need we'll have to bring with us.
Right.
I'm not a botanist, though I was a biology major. You're going to need to start off with hydroponics, almost certainly. You're not going to go straight to growing your crops in Martian soil,
Right.
because the soil is going to have to be processed. You're going to have to remove the perchlorates, the peroxides, anything, potentially heavy metals. There's a lot of things that you're going to need to remove. So I think hydroponics is going to start off as what we're going to have. So I don't think that's a huge showstopper.
Not a showstopper.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Let's talk about the larger issue of sustainability, because you don't want to have these people there for life continuously being resupplied from Earth. I mean, the cost is one issue, but also what if these resupply missions stop?
Right. Well, the idea is for them to stop. One of the Mars One key parameters is for the colony to be as self-sufficient as possible, as early as possible. And if even the first mission could have an in-situ resource, additive manufacturing machine, a 3D printer, if you will, they could take atmospheric gases and create plastics, or could take regolith, for example, with 14% iron oxide, and combine it with some of the carbon from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or that you find. Then you can basically make steels or some of these 3D printed metals. And once you do that, then as long as you have a qualification process or some sort of spec that you can qualify your parts to, then you can start using these parts in a very predictable way. And anything you can make on Mars has it's a compound chain of events that leads to things logistically coming from Earth. If you can make stuff on Mars, then you get rid of that entire supply chain problem, which is incredible. I mean, it would take so much more fuel to put a 10-pound part on Mars than it would just to make a 10-pound part. So that's the goal.
Yeah. One concern that I have is that, at some point, if the costs are so high and so ongoing, that there's a loss of political will to continue sending the resupply missions, and tragedy as a result.
Well, isn't it fortunate that Mars One is apolitical then? That's the
That is true.
advantage of that it is a nonprofit organization. It's not NASA. It's not dependent on governmental support.
And that speaks to the funding model. Mars One's multi-pronged funding model includes crowdfunding as much as possible through normal private citizens. So we're talking almost 7.5 billion people on Earth. We're talking about trying to get high net worth individuals to see that it's a viable investment opportunity. We're talking about getting venture capital funds to maybe potentially invest. And yes, it's a high risk proposition, but so was discovering America, and so was all the different exploratory missions that humans have always had throughout our entire lifetimes that have expanded our horizons so that now we know the world we live on.
Do you remember the total capital requirement?
Was it $6
$6
billion?
billion was the
$6 billion.
initial estimate, yeah.
But the wonderful
That
thing
sounds too
about
small.
this, it sounds ambitious. It certainly does. But to speak back to something that I know that we were all focused on for this mission, there is going to be the political will. This train has left the station. Mars One is not the only organization trying to get us to Mars.
Well, NASA's trying to get to Mars.
Well, yeah, we've got NASA, we've got ESA, we've got
SpaceX.
private companies now, SpaceX. And we've seen that the interest is not going away. People are not deterred by accidents and by setbacks when it comes to space exploration. People want to go. And I think that, $6 billion sounds like a small number to get it done. It sounds like an astronomical number to the people that have to raise it. But I don't see that being an issue.
Well, that's the emotional rationale. Well, here's the thing. There is a practical reason for needing to leave Earth, and that is that we're only one extinction event away, and Elon Musk has mentioned this numerous times, we're only one extinction event away from the complete destruction of humanity. So you talk about a plague or some sort of mass outbreak scenario, you talk about an asteroid, rogue asteroid, maybe it comes from the Oort cloud due to some perturbation that NASA hasn't foreseen and NORAD couldn't track, and all of a sudden it's bearing down on us, it's a 6 miler or plus or something. And it will affect the Earth, even though it's only a small, space rock coming to hit us. It has massive fundamental changes to the atmosphere, and if there's a dust event or something, then it blocks out sunlight and affects plants.
Mars, after all, is the gateway to the asteroids.
Exactly.
You know where they are. You want to know what to do with them. You want to exploit them.
So I don't want to
then there
to come
you
off
sit at Mars.
as a doomsday
As to this,
scenario.
but the sustainability objective is eventually closed loop,
Right.
self-sustaining.
Correct.
You can make everything that you consume.
You could, and you can take that as a product almost from Mars, like I said, a spin-off that you could then apply on Earth to kind of help fund the idea of the colony. So maybe that self-sufficient economic model can help sustain it once the political will maybe potentially.
Well, and all of these things that are going to have to be developed over the next decade before we can send humans to Mars, your sustainability, your recycling, all of those things, they're all going to be applicable here on Earth. So we can then use those technologies, just like we got our cell phones out of the Apollo mission. No one foresaw that. But it's this huge benefit, I would say, to humankind. The same thing will happen as we prepare to go to Mars. We're going to discover new technology. We're going to find applications for the space program, for going to Mars and living on Mars. But we're also going to be able to use those things here on Earth.
All right. As a follow-up to the earlier question about agriculture, which is the reproduction of plant life,
Sure.
probably the single most expensive aspect of this is the humans. You bring them from Earth to Mars. That's one possibility. Let's call that immigration. The second possibility is reproduction on Mars. What are the medical issues of that?
We're not going to be reproducing on Mars anytime soon. It will be decades before I think any sane person would allow that to happen. The amount of research that we need to do before we can attempt human reproduction on Mars is incredible. You'd need to bring small mammals. You'd need to have a breeding colony of mice or rats. You'd have to see, can they become pregnant in low gravity? Can they gestate for the full gestation in low gravity? Will the organs develop normally? Will radiation affect? So there's just so many things. Immigration to Mars is going to be how people get there for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so for the first decades, no reproduction, but perhaps you need some kind of an animal model.
Absolutely.
Let's say mice.
I like rats, and primates
Right.
eventually, but not right away.
But from
Right.
a practical perspective, the cheapest way, from a supply chain perspective, the cheapest way to get people on Mars is to make them on Mars.
Yes.
Just like it's the cheapest way to make parts or to bring parts to Mars is to make them on Mars.
Yeah.
So once it's safe and not before, then I think that should be the focus.
Right.
But I also see this as an outlet for humanity. You know, we have 7 billion people now on the planet. There's only going to be more later. I don't want 7 billion people here and 7 billion people there. I'd like to offload some of the people from Earth to Mars, to Europa, elsewhere.
And that's where Elon Musk's wonderful, 50 or 100 person Mars colonial transport comes into play, where Mars One kind of kicks the door down politically, saying, look, it's feasible, let's do it in an apolitical way outside of the government model, kind of like SpaceX. But they kick the door down with just an initial cadre of individuals who are specifically trained to be very self-reliant, okay? Then you've proven the feasibility thing. Once they're there, it's obviously feasible. Once they're surviving, then people see that as an example that they can then follow. And that generates intense interest from people who are then capably, if they could maybe sell all of their resources and pay the price, then you could have mass immigration from Earth to Mars.
Okay, so immigration could be on a large scale. Now, I think Musk has used numbers as high as 1 million.
Yes, he would like to see 1 million people. I think I've read reports that 10,000 humans are sufficiently diverse to sustain, a village-sized.
Less.
Yeah,
Less than
potentially.
10,000.
And he had some thought
Well-
of 80,000 humans. About
So the numbers potentially
his
range.
upper limit in colonies.
I don't think a genetic bottleneck is really going
No.
to be an issue because we have the technology to transport eggs and sperm.
No, that's true.
So
Right.
I really
Yeah.
don't think that's an issue. Genetic diversity, we can maintain that.
We have to very specifically shield that stuff, but yeah, we could get it.
But what we know from prehistoric, the settlement, the Polynesian settlement of the islands in the Pacific, you could say genetic bottleneck, but it worked out all right.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
So, all right. Perhaps.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking about that Jurassic Park quote that life will find a way.
Life will find a way.
Yeah,
Indeed.
that's true. All right, let's go way out on a speculative limb and ask you, what will life be like
Oh my
on
gosh.
Mars?
Well, I think the short answer to that question is really uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but certainly extraordinary, probably very rewarding, exhausting. There's going to be so much regular maintenance and careful vigilance to make sure that our community thrives once we get there. So it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be so much work.
There'll be intense rewards too. Potentially you could be talking about finding existing or extant or previous life. You could be talking about exploring a completely unknown planet, a beautiful planet. And some people characterize it differently, and I would call those people cynics. And cynicism may be trendy, but it's pretty useless. When you see this thing, when you see a sunset on Mars, and you see the blue sun, it's incredible. It's the same star, but it's a completely different experience because you're on a different planet, and you can only experience it as a human if you're on that planet.
So now, pioneering it's tough. We know from the settlement of the United States, a lot of losses, I might add, right?
And yet here we are.
Yeah.
I don't know that has deterred anyone in the 100. I think we all sort of understand the enormous risk at stake, but this is worth a life. It's worth 10 lives. It's worth a dozen.
And we're talking about potentially securing another island of humanity away from Earth in case something were to happen to Earth. I think that's important to bring up. And if it were easy, it would already be done.
Yeah, of course. Let me just throw out a question. I think most people would be afraid to step on the rocket, or get into the rocket. What would you be most afraid of as a candidate?
I think for me, from the engineering knowledge that I have, entry, descent, and landing is our biggest challenge right now. So going through the Mars atmosphere, actually landing where you want to land, where you intend to land.
Yeah.
And so if we could focus most of our efforts on solving that, and I know a lot of people are, then that would alleviate a lot of my concern.
All right. How about you, Sonia?
I think my concerns are a little more human, a little more human, yes. And I love, being part of the 100 has been an extraordinary experience for me. I do not have the medical training that Leila has. I don't have the engineering training that Oscar has. This is, for me, a sort of philosophical adventure. And so I think what scares me more than anything is the possibility of the failure. And I know it's going to happen one day, and I know someone will do it at some point, but I sure would like to be around to see it happen.
But humans are very resilient to failure. We had the Apollo 1 fire, we had Challenger in Columbia, and that didn't derail the space shuttle program, for example.
We all know this. There's always a first accident.
Right.
Yeah, I think we all know. Bob, how about you?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that the candidates will face, and they have some opinions on this too, is that this process of establishing technology readiness is not easy, and it's not guaranteed, and this could read like Don Quixote, or it could read like the Manhattan Project. It can go either way and anywhere in between. So these folks will move forward, part of the readiness, and then it may or may not come to fruition.
I have to echo Sonia. I have only one fear related to settling Mars, and that's that we simply won't go.
It won't go. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us here on Around Space and our panel of guests.
Mars to